Getting down to the final 53 men of any roster is a very stressful and also sometimes a very heartbreaking effort. And for the Detroit Lions and Dan Campbell, it definitely is going to be that. But not only are we going to talk about that, we're going to talk about my prediction for the 2024 season. So stay tuned.
What are we? What makes us what we are and what we're going to be? It's grit. It's what we started with last year, guys. Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and three toes. I will beat your ass.
Can definitely compete with the big dogs.
10-5 end zone touchdown Detroit Lions.
You guys are unbelievable, man. I'm telling you.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, Detroit Lions fans, and welcome on back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike, and as always, we're diving on in. My friends, in today's episode, I am finally going to be revealing what my prediction for the Detroit Lions this year is going to be as far as a win-loss total, but I'm also going to be talking about my roster final prediction here. I know that we haven't played the final preseason game, but I'm going to be entirely honest. I don't really expect a whole lot to really change the outcome as far as who's going to make the roster and who's not going to make the roster in the final preseason game. However, though, with that being said, there are going to be some surprises, I think, in this roster that I have based upon, one, my own past, announcements that I've made, but also because of what I think some people are still expecting to happen. But we'll get to that in a little bit here. The first part of today's episode is we're going to be talking about my long-awaited prediction for the year, because I know for a fact that there have been a lot of my fans that have been asking me, David, when are you going to drop your prediction? When are you going to tell us what you think the Lions are going to do this year? And I'm going to tell you this right now. The reason why I didn't want to push this out until at this point was, one, I wanted to see what the roster was going to look like. And the reason why is because this year the roster making it was going to be a lot more difficult and a lot different than what it has been in the past. Again, this is the first year where the entire NFL is going from the gradual roster cuts down to just the one massive cut at the very end. So that's a very different formality. That's a very different process than what we're used to in the past. But also at the same time, this year the roster has been so much more competitive to try and get on. So it's like, listen, I couldn't just make a prediction based upon anything. I had to see how everybody was individually doing before I could make that prediction. And as such, because of that, I had to wait on that before I could actually give my, final prediction for what I thought the Lions were going to do as far as win-loss. So what I'm going to do when it comes to the whole win-loss total as far as prediction, I'm going to give what I think is the best case scenario as far as the ceiling, if you will, and then I'm going to give what I think is the worst case scenario as far as the basement is concerned. A lot of people do this, and this is me doing it as well to kind of cover both sides of the aisle, so to speak. So let's take a look at the Lions' schedule. Obviously, we know in Week 1, we're at home against the Rams. Week 2, we're at home against the Bucs. Week 3, we're at the Cardinals. Week 4, we're home against the Seahawks. Obviously, Week 5, we have our bye week. Week 6, we're at the Cowboys. Week 7, we're at the Vikings. Week 8, we're home against the Titans. Week 9, we're at the Packers. Week 10, we're at the Texans. Week 11, we're versus the Jags. Week 12, we're at the Colts. Week 13, we're home against the Packers. Week 14, we're home against Week 13, we're home against the Bears. Week 14, we're home against the Packers. Week 15, we're home against the Bills. Week 16, we're on the road at the Bears. Week 17, we're on the road at the 49ers. And the last week of the year, Week 18, we're back home to finish out against the Vikings. So, based upon that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try my best to put this all up on a screen so that way you guys can see what I believe our best case scenario is in terms of the win-loss total and what I think the worst case scenario is as far as the win-loss total. And then I'm going to explain my reasoning here rather than saying, I think this is going to be a win, this is not going to be a win, because that's going to take much more time than what's absolutely necessary. My best case scenario for the Lions as far as a win-loss prediction is going to be a 14-3 record. Now, as you're going to see up on the screen, that's a whole hell of a lot of damn W's. And realistically, I look at this prediction, and I honestly think that the Lions are not going to lose a game at home this year. I don't see how that's going to happen. We already know that the Lions at home are one of the most dangerous, one of the most explosive teams in the entire NFL. You want to talk about a home field advantage? You play at Ford Field, you've got a great home field advantage. First and foremost, it's a domed area, so it's loud as hell when you got 67,000 fans that are just absolutely screaming their heads off. But then on top of that, the way the Lions play at home is extremely better than how they play on the road. That's not to say the Lions don't play very good on the road. They do. But when they're at home, it's a completely different animal. And the way I look at it is I don't see really anybody that the Lions are going to play this year at home that's really going to be able to overcome that. Again, I know that there are people who are going to say, well, David, what about the Bills? What about the Packers later in the year? And it's like, listen, I'm not really worried about the Bills. Again, the Bills have really kind of fallen off ever since, they lost Stephon Diggs. Von Miller is not the same player that he was freaking 5-6 years ago. He's still a good player, don't get me wrong. But at this point, as much as I hate to say it, I think the Bills are kind of like what the Lions used to be back when Stafford was here in the early 2010s. They have some pieces, don't get me wrong. But at this point, the Bills are pretty much putting all their pins and hopes on freaking Josh Allen being able to win. And I'm sorry, after watching Stafford do that for so many years, I know that freaking Josh Allen is not going to be able to do that. He's going to win games, don't get me wrong. But the Lions' defense has gotten extremely much more improved this offseason. The Lions' offense is still one of the best in the league. I don't think that's going to change anything. And as far as the Packers are concerned, listen, everybody can try and herald Jordan Love as, the next Hall of Fame quarterback for the Packers and, the Packers this, the Packers. I don't give a damn. The point of the matter is that the Packers barely beat us last year, even though we spotted them 3 turnovers in the Thanksgiving Day game. I guarantee you this, that's not going to happen this year. I am damn level bet sure that that's not going to happen this year. Now, some people are going to take a look at that schedule and they're going to be like, oh, well, who do you have us losing to? The 3 games I have us losing to on that schedule, 2 of them are back-to-back. The 2 that I have us back-to-back losing are the ones that are on the road against the Packers in Week 9 and then on the road against the Texans in Week 10. And the reason why I have it that way is simply put because, again, the Packers are better. I'm not going to disparage that. I'm not going to disagree with that. And I do expect that the Packers are probably going to get one on us because they are a much better team than what I was expecting they were going to be at this point. Because I was still thinking that Jordan Love was not going to show anything last year. And I can't just be totally dismissive of the fact that, yes, over the last half of the season last year, he did very well. Plus, on top of that, again, as much as I would love the Lions to go, damn near perfect, I can't do that because then it sounds like I'm just completely being oblivious to fact here. So it's like, okay, fine. I think the Packers can beat us at their place because Lambeau Field is still a pretty nice place. And on top of that, again, I think the Packers are improved enough to where they can beat us in one scenario. And I think the best place for them to do that is at their own place. So that's why I gave the Packers that win there. As far as the Texans are concerned, first and foremost, I believe the Texans are a very talented team. They have a very talented roster, and I believe they're going to make a lot of noise this year. But the reason more so I think the Texans beat the Lions in this case is because, let's just call it for what it is, the Lions and the Texans don't play each other that often. So there's not a whole lot of, understanding. There's not a whole lot of, how should I say it, there's not really a whole lot of ability for each team to say, hey, we know what this team's going to do here. And that, for me, is kind of a little bit of an odd place for the Lions to be at because most of these other teams we've played quite a bit. Whereas the Texans, it's like, I can't even remember the last time we played them. And the fact that the Texans are a very highly, talented defensive squad as well as an offensive squad, I take a look at that game and it's like, okay, that's a game I think that's going to be a really good matchup, but with the fact that the Texans are at home, I think that they get the edge there. And then the last game that I think that the Lions lose is the game at Chicago against the Bears in Week 16. And the only reason I have the Bears winning that game is because it's going to be outside, it's going to be cold. And let's call it for what it is. I've watched the Lions play in the cold elements over the last couple of years, and it's kind of hit or miss when we go outside and we play in the cold. Can we do it? Yes, we can. But again, I look at the fact that we're going to be outside. It's going to be really, really late in the year. It's also Chicago, so it's going to be windy. I don't really see that going very well in our favor. And again, I'm trying to make this look like, hey, there's actually a chance that the Lions are not, impregnable, that they're not unbeatable. So that's the reason why I have the Lions going 14-3 in my best case scenario. Now, worst case scenario, much like I did with the best case scenario, I'm going to put it up on the screen so that way you guys can see it. The way I look at the worst case scenario is that I think the Lions in the worst case scenario go 10-7. Again, I said this yesterday when I released my one episode talking about that freaking loony bin of that sports betting guru or whatever. I simply do not see a way the Lions don't win less than 10 games this year. And 10 is the very bare minimum I see them winning. Because the way I look at it is much like the best case scenario, I have the same 3 teams that we lost to in that one. But the 4 swing games that I think the Lions could lose is, first and foremost, the game against the Rams at home, because whether or not I want to admit it, the Rams are a pretty damn good team. Stafford is obviously going to be looking for revenge, so it's like, hey, that game could swing the other way. So that's the first game that I think could swing the other way. The other game I think that could swing the other way is obviously the Cowboys game. Obviously, the Lions want revenge for that game because of the whole Taylor Decker incident, Brad Allen, and all that nonsense. But again, the Cowboys are, we're going to be in Jerry World, and I just expect that something stupid is going to happen, and that very well could change things to where we go from a W to an L. The next game, again, that I think that could swing the other way is the game at the very end of the year when we're home against the Packers. Because, again, I do expect the Packers are going to be a much better team than what they were last year when they squeaked into the playoffs. I'm not saying that they're going to be better than us, but I still expect that they're going to be able to contend with us. I still expect that they're going to compete with us. And then the final game that I think that could swing the other way from what I had in the best case scenario is the game against the 49ers. Again, I know the Lions want to get that game won more so than anything because they want to get that bad taste of the NFC Championship game out of their mouth. But again, I can't overlook the fact that the 49ers are one of the best teams in the NFL. They're talented as hell, and who knows, by the time we get to the end of the year, they're going to be in championship form. So again, that's a game that literally is going to come up to who really is at their best at that point in the year. So that's why I have both sets of schedules the way I do. If I'm being entirely honest, I honestly expect that the Lions are going to be something much more closer to the best case scenario, barring, of course, a massive injury outbreak. Knock on wood. But that's what I expect the Lions are going to be. I expect they're going to be anywhere between 14-3 and 10-7. In my honest opinion, I think 14-3 is a much more accurate barometer of what they're going to be at versus the 10-7 because I'm just looking at this schedule, and there's a lot more winnable games than I think there are toss-up games. So that's just my personal opinion. But you guys do with it what you will. Now, as far as the roster prediction, I said there were going to be some surprises on here. And the reason why there are going to be some surprises on here is because, one, I already know that I have said a couple of things where I was like, hey, I don't see how this player gets on this roster. But I'm going to say this right now. It's a numbers game. And when you have to have 53 men to go to the active roster, it's like, okay, here. You start crunching numbers. You start being like, okay, I'm enough at this position point. I got enough at this position point. Okay, how do we make this whole thing work? So here's what I'm going to say. When it comes to the positional breakdown of the Lions roster prediction for me for 2024, this is what I have. For quarterbacks, I have the Lions carrying 3 because at this point, I know a lot of Lions fans don't want to hear this, but I don't see a way that the Lions are going to cut Nate Sudfeld. It's just not going to happen. Hell, Dan Campbell literally said yesterday that Nate Sudfeld had the upper hand against Hooker. And it's like, listen, I know that probably made a lot of Lions fans absolutely want to lose their lunch, but it's like, listen, at that point then, pretty much Dan Campbell almost pretty much wrote Nate Sudfeld into the roster. There's no chance of him getting cut at this point. Because the way I look at it is the Lions want him there because he has more experience being a veteran and more experience in the in the offense versus Hooker. Even though Hooker has more promise, even though Hooker has more talent, they want Hooker to have time to develop rather than forcing him into a position that he's not yet quite ready for. So, Lions are going to keep 3 quarterbacks in my opinion. Running backs. I believe the Lions are going to keep 4. And here's why I'm going to say this is going to be my first surprise. I actually have the Lions keeping Craig Reynolds here. And again, I have said it throughout the entirety of my time here. I love Craig Reynolds. I love what he does. The only reason why I didn't think the Lions were going to keep Craig Reynolds is because it's like, listen, when you start getting into those last couple of roster spots, it gets very ticky-tacky. It gets very throw-up. Because it's like, okay, could this guy potentially make it? Could this guy potentially make it? And what I found is once I got down to the last couple of spots, I was like, hey, you know what? I don't really see anybody that's better than Craig Reynolds. And Craig Reynolds does still have value to the running back room. And it's like, listen, carrying 3 running backs, you can do that. But the running back position is one that gets a lot of stress. It gets a lot of wear and tear. It's better to have another running back just in case somebody goes down with injury. I have a lot of confidence in Vaki, but it's like, listen, Craig Reynolds has been here for a while. He absolutely knows the offense. He is reliable. Hey, that right there is more than enough for me to have him on the roster. So I will admit that, you know what? Hey, I might have jumped the gun a little bit on it, but I understand why I said what I said. I also admit that, hey, I've always had Craig Reynolds as a guy that I really think is a good player. I just didn't know if he was going to make it because of how competitive the roster is. Now, when we get to the tight end group, which is the next group, this is probably going to be one that is a little bit weird for some people. I'm only keeping 3 tight ends in my roster because as far as I'm concerned, I don't see Sam Laporta having any problems. I don't see Brock Wright having any problems. So then it comes down to, okay, who's the 3rd tight end? Who's the next best fit for this roster? I don't see it being James Mitchell. In my honest opinion, I think it's Shane Zylstra. The Lions kept him around for a reason. He's the next best receiving option outside of Sam Laporta, in my opinion. So it's like, hey, you have Laporta, who's a receiving option. You have Brock Wright, who's more of a blocking option. And then you have Zylstra, who's another receiving option. That, to me, makes the most sense. Then we get to the wide receiver group. I'm telling you this right now. This is one that still very much is in flux, but based upon what I'm seeing and because I don't know what the Lions are going to do if they decide to go out into the market, this is why I kept the 5 guys that I have, which is Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Khalif Raymond, Isaiah Williams, and Donovan Peoples-Jones. And I'm going to tell you this right now. The only reason that I'm keeping Donovan Peoples-Jones on this roster is simply because of the fact that out of all the guys that the Lions have, he's the one guy that fits that other big, tall wide receiver that the Lions are looking for. And that despite the fact he really hasn't done a whole hell of a lot in the preseason games, I'm still under the impression that the Lions want to keep him because of the fact that they're basing everything more so than just the preseasons. They're basing off of what's going on in practice. And as far as I'm concerned, what I have seen from highlight clips, what I've heard from reports is that, listen, when Donovan Peoples-Jones is actually out there catching balls from Jared Goff, it's a completely different dynamic than it is when he's trying to catch passes from Nate Sudfeld and from Hendon Hooker. Again, I'm not saying anything bad about Hooker here, but it's like, listen, when you're catching passes from Jared Goff, who understands this offense inside and out perfectly, that's a completely different understanding of the whole situation than when you're having passes caught in vanilla concepts from backup quarterbacks. So that's the only reason why I'm keeping Donovan Peoples-Jones. I freely admit that he might get cut and the Lions might look outside the organization to bring somebody in. But out of all the other wide receivers that are not Isaiah Williams, Raymond, Jameson Williams, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, I can't take out Donovan Peoples-Jones in comparison. Because it's like, listen, Caden Davis, he's nice, but he's really only had one real move where it's been like, hey, you know what? He kind of popped up on the radar. Tom Kennedy, he's reliable. He's a great player. But is he a guy that you really want on your roster unless it's an emergency? Not really. So that's the reason why I have Donovan Peoples-Jones there over Davis, Tom Kennedy, and a couple others. Then we get to the 2 biggest position groups on this roster, which is the line groups. The offensive line group, I have 9 guys that are going to be making it. Obviously, we have the 5 starters, which are Decker, Zeitler, Ragnow, Glasgow, and Sewell. That's not changing. Everybody knew that was going to happen. Then it comes to the backups, which is the one where it's kind of a little bit more flexible. You have Manu, you have Swordsdale, you have Mahogany, and you have Skipper. Again, I don't see how the Lions are going to get rid of Skipper because Skipper is that one guy that he always does whatever they ask him to do, and they have held on to him forever and a day. I just don't see them getting rid of him. Swordsdale, while he's had a little bit of a rough camp, he has made a lot of improvement, and I think the Lions are going to like to keep him because he's a guy that can play tackle, he can play guard, he has a lot of flexibility for that line. And then obviously the Lions, they traded up to get Manu, so they're obviously going to keep him. And Mahogany, we always keep hearing that he's getting better and better, and I don't see the Lions putting him on like some list where he can't be able to play once he's ready to go. So I expect the Lions are going to keep him as well. Then we get to the defensive line group, which is in essence both the defensive interior and the edge group. For that, I have 10 different names. So I have Hutch, I have Davenport, I have Pascal, I have Ukwu, I have McNeil, I have Reeder, I have Levi, I have Wingo, I have Broderick, and I also have Pecco. The only guy I do not have there is James Houston, because again, James, I know that there are people that are going to say, David, stop the James Houston hate, and I've seen it in the comments. I understand why people don't like me doing this, but it's like, dude, when you're getting to this point in the roster breakdown, it's like, listen, you have to do something to where when you're getting down to the last couple of spots, it's not a choice of how you maintain yourself on the roster here. And the problem with Houston is even if you put him in the right position, because there's some people that want to say, oh, well, James Houston's just not being used correctly. He's not being put in the right position. Okay, fine. But even if you put him in that one position, even if you put him in the one position that he's really good at, it's only situational. And again, I'm sorry, but that's not going to cut it for this roster anymore. I can't have a guy that's only going to be able to play 15, 20 snaps out of a game and might be able to get one sack. That's not going to cut it. And again, there's now tape out on James Houston. Everybody knows how to expect and plan for him. So it's like, for me, it's like, if there was nobody else that I think could push, James Houston out, then possibly, yeah, he would make the roster. But it's like, listen, take a look at Ukwu. Ukwu, he has literally done a very good job, not only playing as a linebacker, but also as an edge rusher. So it's like, I can't really, do anything with that. Plus, on top of that, you also have Derek Barnes, who's shown promise at the Sam linebacker position. We've heard how Levi has been starting to do very well at the edge rushing position as they've been giving him some reps there as well. So it's like, because of the fact that James Houston has been such a one-trick pony and he hasn't been able to expand his playing base, he's kind of become his own worst enemy. So that's that. Moving to linebackers. Obviously, pretty straightforward at this one. I have Anzalone, I have Campbell, I have Jalen Reeves-Maybin, I have Rodrigo, and I have Barnes. Not really a whole lot of a shake-up there. Cornerbacks. At this one, again, maybe a little bit of a shake-up, but not too much. I have Arnold, Rakestraw, I have Davis, I have Robertson, I have Vildor, and I have Dorsey. Again, I don't expect Stephen Gilmore to make it because, again, he hasn't really done a whole lot. I expect the Lions are probably going to bring him back as a practice squad player, but when it comes to the other guys, those guys have been playing a lot better. They've been getting a lot more looks. When it comes to safety, I have 5 safeties, and the reason why I have 5 safeties is because of one specific player. The 5 I have is Branch, I have Kirby Joseph, Brandon Joseph, Ife Melifonwu, and I have C.J. Moore. The only reason I have C.J. Moore is because of his special teams capabilities. Everybody knows that the Lions like C.J. Moore as a special teams player. He's one of their best special teams players. So for me, it's like, just because of that alone, he's going to make the roster because he's a really great special teams player. I don't really expect him to get a whole lot of looks at safety unless we get a freaking injury bug there. But the Lions want guys that know how to play in special teams. C.J. Moore is definitely good at that. And then obviously we have the specialists, which are the kicker, the punter, and obviously the long snapper, which for me is Jake Bates, Jack Fox, and Scott Daly. Those are the 3 for that position, which when you count all those numbers up that I just gave, you get to 53. So I know for some people, they're going to be happy that I put Craig Reynolds back on this list because they like Craig Reynolds. I like Craig Reynolds too, but it's like, listen, when I was coming down to the last couple of spots, I simply just could not keep him off the roster because it's like, I don't see anybody that's better than him. But on the other hand, I know there's still going to be people that are going to be upset with me because of James Houston, but it's like, listen, you can argue that all you want, but it's like there's a reason why James Houston has been not getting the same amount of looks. He's been struggling in training camp, and it's like the Lions are trying to push him to do more, and he simply can't. And when you're looking at a roster that's competing for a Super Bowl, you have to be able to further grow. You have to be able to further progress. You can't just stay stagnant and remain still. That's why I don't think James Houston makes the roster. Now, is it possible he could make the practice squad? Maybe. But I do agree with people. Because of his name and because of what he did in 2022, chances are somebody's going to scoop him up. But as far as I'm concerned, it's like, listen, because of his limited talent status, I really just don't see how the Lions keep him on the roster versus somebody else who has shown a lot more in preseason and also in training camp. But anyway, People will do with this what they will. Again, all I ask is you please keep it respectful. I understand that there's going to be, again, spirited debate. I understand people are going to get upset on some of these, but it is what it is. Having said all that, I'm going to end the episode and say thank you all for watching yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, I highly encourage y'all to watch the next episode. Also want to encourage y'all, please do one of these three things. Like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If by chance you subscribed in the past and forgot to do so at the time, or you just subscribed, you've not had a chance to do so, again, want to highly encourage y'all to subscribe. But I also want to encourage y'all, please, make sure you hit that bell notification icon as well, so that way you guys never miss any more content that I push out. Also want to encourage y'all, please, just share this content with your Lions friends and family members. Share it here on YouTube, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, share it anywhere and everywhere you can with everybody and anybody that you can. The more we can share it, the greater the channel grows and spreads. And with that being said, to everybody, I hope y'all are doing well. I hope y'all have something in your life that makes you happy, makes you smile. I hope y'all enjoyed the content. God bless. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.